Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jivraj, and today I have with me a very distinguished guest. Join me in welcoming Jaideep Burman, the founder and CEO of the world's largest internet restaurant. Thank you so much, Jaideep, for joining me. I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting you today.
Thank you, Jivraj. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great to hear that. And as I was mentioning, I think I'm fascinated by so many of the things that Rebel Foods has done over the years and that you have done, specially, that I'm going to talk about it through the conversation. But I want to start with the DNA of building and doing things differently. I think that's a common pattern I've observed across the multiple things that Rebel Foods has done. And I want to understand from you what that means to you personally, and how have you been able to inculcate that as you build something that is so pioneering in terms of technology, as you disrupt an industry, as you claim has not been disrupted by internet in the past, and something that Rebel Foods is especially pioneering. So if you can help us understand how you inculcate the DNA of doing things differently across the team and in yourself, I think that'll be a great conversation starter.
Cool. Okay, let me give it a try. Some of these things are difficult to explain, and many
Yeah.
of these things are sort of hindsight. But there is this two by two that Ray Dalio's principles talk about,
Mhm.
which is, on one hand you are right and you are wrong, and on the other axis you have people agree with you and people don't agree with you.
Mhm.
Typically, when you are right and people agree with you, is a normal business. Like
Mhm.
you take a like McDonald's franchisee, or you start a sort of a steel plant or something like that. Yeah, maybe not. That's not a great example, but
Yeah.
basically that's when like normal things happen.
Mhm.
When you know what you are doing is great and people agree with you. But the abnormal returns happen when you know you are right, but the world doesn't agree with you.
Yeah.
And like, for example,
Mhm.
stock picking, like, this stock is undervalued, but the world doesn't agree. That's
Yeah.
why it is undervalued. And that's why you make a killing, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, my favorite example is when, Gandhi did the non-violence. It's something that he knew that it's going to work, but the world didn't agree. That's why, he created a place for himself in the in the history, so to speak. So all abnormal returns happen when you know something to be true but the world doesn't agree with you.
Mhm.
And that, I believe, is at the core of the rebel DNA,
Mhm.
that trying to see things before the world sort of sees it or agrees with it.
Yeah.
And the day we from there, once you start like that, and you do something that the world doesn't agree with, and you prove to be right, you make a abnormal return, but then people will start copying you. So you'll move from that box to the box of, you are right but people agree with you, and
Mhm.
then you will find competition, imitators, and then you become a normal business. So unless and until a big part of your DNA is always in that box of what I know and the world doesn't agree with,
Mhm.
you would always find yourself in this competitive vortex, and it's not easy. So, and this is what Jeff Bezos calls day one, by the way,
Yeah.
that there has to be a big part of your business uh, in day one. Day one means that you can visualize something, see something that the world doesn't agree with. So I've been, vocally promoting this idea,
Yeah.
in our company. And, initially I had to do it, but later on it became sort of the DNA of the company, the leadership, people who stuck around with us.
Mhm.
Most people think like that at Rebel, that, what can we do for the customer that the world hasn't seen yet? Maybe world doesn't agree, and start from there. I don't know whether that answers your question, but that's how at least we
Yeah.
we we think about this structure. Yeah.
No, no, that I think does, and that's very interesting to hear. And you've mentioned in the past that most disruptions will happen by people who are unreasonable, who are contrarian in nature, right? And in fact, I want to double click on that. How do you find conviction, or anybody who's on the part of doing something contrarian, something truly disruptive that maybe others cannot see? in the process of it, when the world is against you or maybe not in favor of you, how do you find that conviction in yourself and keep telling yourself that I'm going to keep marching towards the mission till, if not everybody believes in it, at least the mission gets through? I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I'd love your opinion there.
See, when we start something, we don't say, okay, we are being contrarian, and, being contrarian for the sake of contrarian is not the point. The point
Right.
is thinking from first principle, that logically, not having the sort of baggage of past experience, etc. Something seems to be making sense in our head from a first principle point of view, and we go down that path. And there have been times when we've been proven wrong and we have backtracked, and we made those mistakes all the time. But there are some cases where the data tells us before anyone else that we are on the right path. And that's the sweet spot of disruption, right? You imagine something from a first principle, like, for example, we realized early that in food, customers are not the segments. Customer missions are the segments. Which is quite unlike any other consumer goods. Now, nobody told us this, and there was no book about it or anything like that. But it occurred to us based on looking at patterns, looking at how customers are behaving. We realized that the same customer buys a 20 rupee chai and also goes to a 5-star hotel, during a weekend. Anything else in life, like you either drive a Mercedes or a Maruti, you either fly business class or coach, not at the same time. But in food, you do that all the time. So that's an insight coming from first principle. And then we say, okay, how can we build different missions around that customer's life and address different missions? And that's how we went down. And we saw data which proved our theory. And we said, okay, this is great. So let's move. But for some of these things that went right, there were many things that we were proven wrong. But the starting point was the same, first principle thinking, and not being bogged down by experience or past and things like that.
Got it. No, that's wonderful to hear. And I think that sets us up perfectly well for the next aspect, where I want to understand the mission and the long-term focus better, right? So the way you describe Rebel is not the way perhaps I will. For me, it could be, let's say, a host of brands that I love consuming on a day-to-day basis. But the way you talk about it is making this operating system to launch multiple brands, right? And now the audacious mission is to grow to the world and really, really establish yourself. Now, what I want to understand there is, when the mission is as audacious, as bold, how do you ensure that your eye as a founder is constantly on the long term, vis-a-vis also managing the short-term execution, this constant battle that exists, right? If you can perhaps expand your perspective and experience of executing this, I think that'd be great to hear for everyone who's a young builder out there.
Sure. See, our long-term mission is bringing great food brands across all customer missions in all the neighborhoods in the world. That's, in a nutshell, our missions.
Right.
Now, if you dissect this mission, there are 3 parts. One is great food brands. Second is across all missions. Third is all neighborhoods. So as long as whatever we are doing is aligned to one of these things, then long-term, short-term, these 2 things sort of converge, because then we are always on that path. Right? Like great quality food brands. Now, if there are brands already established, we bring those. If not, then we build those brands. So that's focus number 1. Second, keep addressing customer missions. So today we are doing, single serve or, group ordering. Tomorrow it might be beyond restaurants. Tomorrow it could be ready to cook or snacks or, I don't know. I mean, it's an infinite canvas, so to speak, because, so as long as we are always building new missions and catering new, use cases for the customer. So that's the second piece. And then the third piece is in all neighborhoods in the world. So as long as we keep building new kitchens or enter new markets through some other mode, which we have started doing in some countries. So these are the three things. Now, coming from these three things, there are like yearly goals. So which missions will we go after this year? That becomes a short term, but it's very aligned to the long term. Because this year we'll build these missions, next year we'll pick up some other missions, the year after, third set of missions. This year we'll, move to these neighborhoods, next year we'll move to the next set of neighborhoods. So it's all, so in the beginning of the year, we look at these three pieces and we say, what do we need to accomplish this year?
Right.
And, and we, sometimes we execute well, sometimes we, we fall short, but then again, we take a stock. Okay, what do we need to accomplish next year? That's a very, sort of a very structured way of aligning our mission to what we do today and what challenges we pick up tomorrow. And this has largely worked for us in terms of aligning this, because otherwise, it always comes across as we are doing too many things. Are we, getting distracted, etc. Unless and until you align it with, a long-term mission that every employee or every person working in your company understands.
Right.
And fundamentally, everybody working in your company should be asking themselves, whatever I'm doing, is it aligned to the long-term mission of the company? If the answer is yes, then the guy or girl gets motivated. If the answer is no, they'd be thinking, what the hell am I doing?
Yeah.
And if you can create an atmosphere where, every piece of work is aligned to that long-term mission, then short terms and long terms sort of blur and they become one and the same. That has been at least my experience. Yeah.
No, absolutely. What I'm hearing is just like such great bracketing, which can align both short term and long term together so that everybody is working towards that one common goal of establishing the mission, as you summed it up beautifully. So that's a great cue there. But, I want to take a trip down memory lane and maybe understand from you as to decoding consumer insights, right? Because through the journey of Rebel and Fasus earlier, there have been multiple of these light bulb moments, right? Where there was this survey taken, 78% folks mentioned that, they've never gone to a store, but they've ordered from Fasus. And similarly with, Fasus pizza vis-a-vis Oven Story pizza. What I'm trying to eye at here is, as a founder, especially early on in the journey, you're getting so much feedback, right? How do you filter out the feedback, or let's say, take feedback, then filter it out, and then work on strategic things? How does this how does this entire cycle work out in practicality, and how did it play out with Fasus, with the multiple things that the consumer must be suggesting? If you could maybe focus on that and help us understand the more practical nuances of this, that'll be great.
Yeah, fundamentally, I believe, and hopefully my team believes, that all friction in business goes away when you are customer backward. When you're thinking of the customer and then working backward from there, all frictions go away.
Yeah.
Like our first big friction in our business was real estate cost. And we were thinking very hard, how to take care of this friction. The answer was given to us by the customers. So that is the survey we are talking about. When we were really wondering, how can we afford so much real estate cost, so much rental, etc. But when our customers told us they don't need to visit our stores to consume our food, we got the answer that we don't need high street real estate. Right? Similarly, when our customers told us that I may be eating a wrap on a Monday afternoon, but I would be eating a biryani on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
Then we realized, again, working backwards, that because we don't have a facade, like we don't have Fasos or something written in front of our cloud kitchen, we can use the same kitchen to address both the missions of the customer.
Yeah.
So, and then we tried doing that under Fasos. Again, our customers told us, boss, I like biryani and wraps, but I don't believe one company can make the two things equally well.
Yeah.
So then we realized, okay, customers want a different brand or different expertise in different cuisines. That's why you don't have a multi-cuisine famous restaurant in the world.
Yeah.
So again, customers told us that you need to I will buy pizza from you, but only when I'm convinced that you are an expert in making pizza. Someone who is an expert in making wraps probably is not an expert in making pizza. So hence we came up with the idea of different brands for different products.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, once we had biryani and, desserts and wraps and meals, etc. launched, we still saw there are some occasions where we are not addressing those missions. Customers are telling us, okay, I don't get, this from you.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I don't get a burger from you. So that got us thinking and said, okay, it'll take us 50, 100 years to build a brand in each of these missions. Maybe we can partner with third-party brands and bring them on our platform and try and address these customer missions faster and faster.
Yeah.
So it's always, looking at what the customer is saying and then working backward and see, okay, how do we solve that?
Right.
That has been the biggest sort of friction remover in our business. But obviously there are other things that we iterated and it became correct. Like there are many brands that never worked because our customers didn't like them and we didn't scale them and so on and so forth.
Right.
But fundamentally, I believe if a company is customer first and then working backward, all frictions in business will eventually go away, because that's the fundamental alignment between a business and its customer, right?
Absolutely. No. Yeah, I think those are all golden words of wisdom. But, Jaideep, if you can help us understand that, considering the scale at which Rebel currently operates, and I'm sure that there are multiple things coming from each direction from the customer itself, how do you know which are the ones that you really should go after and which are the ones you cannot possibly spend resources on? How do you make some of those trade-offs? I think that'd be great to hear.
Yeah. So again, it's a great question. Like, sitting here now, I can think of 20 missions that we don't cater to. Like, for example, custom cakes or homemade food or, vegan sort of snacks or a great healthy breakfast. These are missions that we don't cater to today.
Yeah.
But the way we look at it is, again, we look at how do we expand missions and we say, okay, these are the 2-3 projects we'll pick up. Let's say we'll pick up breakfast, we'll pick up, custom cakes and homemade food. And we'll run small experiments. We will run it in 1 kitchen or 2 kitchens and we'll see how the customers are reacting to that.
Right.
We do not spend or invest, a lot of money behind anything before we know for sure whether customers are liking it or not. That's what we call, product market fit achievement. So at any point in that Rebel, there are at least 20 experiments going on, all addressed to different missions of a customer's life. But these are all small experiments. 1 kitchen, maybe 1 city, maybe 1 feature. But then the moment we get product market fit, we see that customers are loving it. They're coming back for it. Then we scale it. And it's almost like a, top of the funnel, there are 20 experiments sitting. But eventually, a couple of them will be scaled up next year. And then a couple more will be scaled up the year after. That's how we do it. It's a little bit similar to how Amazon operates. Bezos talks about wandering all the time. All of the great innovations in Amazon, Kindle, AWS, Alexa, everything came from those wandering, right? Like experimenting, customer backward things, and then finding the ones that will work beautifully and scaling them. And for every such successful, initiative, there will be a few which will be failures. Like, similarly in our case, that's how we typically do it.
Got it. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you've written a blog post about this, that until PMF is achieved, we don't really spend on marketing on any particular brand, and so on and so forth. So, no, that makes complete sense. And just having that DNA and to hear it, that is so refreshing at scale. If you're being able to maintain this, I'm sure there's such great things yet to come from Rebel, and we all wait for it. But I want to move on to another aspect of the conversation, which I think I've waited for a long time, which is in terms of culture. And this comes from pure fascination of how I've observed so many folks from Rebel talk about the culture at Rebel. So, first up, there is just the realization, and I want to understand from you as to how you got the constant or conscious recognition of the fact that when I'm building an organization, or when the founders were building an organization, that culture is going to be a conscious, deliberate focus, and we're going to do the things differently in a way that can really empower a lot of folks. I think I want to start out with, a very fundamental question there, but it'll be great to understand where that recognition came from and how you expanded on top of it.
Yeah, I think, like most recognitions or realizations, I should say, in life comes from a mistake, right?
Okay.
And similarly, this one also came from a mistake. When we started back in 2011, sort of scaling erstwhile Fasos, we started with hiring people from like food industry. And very soon we got into this mess where, I got a bunch of folks who are always telling me what is not possible, because they came from 20 years of baggage of working in an industry. Now, fundamentally, in hindsight, it was a big mistake on my part, because if I have to change something in an industry, I can't do it with people who worked in that industry.
Yeah.
So Kallol and I still remember that evening when we decided that this is not working out. We need to have folks who would look at things from a fresh perspective, who would, say that, who would never say this is not possible, who would say, okay, let's, give it a try. Let's see, what happens. And let's, think about the customer and work backward rather than industry forward. That industry operates like this, and hence nothing is possible.
Yeah.
So I would say that was the start of this journey. And we started this with, recruiting a bunch of young guys, 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
And what we said on day one was that we don't want these guys to come with any baggage. So they have to be young by definition, and they cannot have a long experience. So which means, 1 or 2 years after business school or engineering or whatever. And they need to be like really, the first value I remember we emphasized on was ownership. That they can't say the world is conspiring against us, or the industry doesn't work like that, things like that. They have to say, okay, I have to figure this out. And, and that's the mentality, which I call even today founder mentality. So there are two types of mentalities, founder and employee. Doesn't matter whether you're employee or founder. Even a founder can have employee mentality, and an employee can have a founder mentality, because founders are fundamentally people who are not afraid of figuring things out, on their own. So we wanted such people, and hence we said, okay, from a CV, we can't recognize that. So let's ask people to send us a note as to why they want to join us, what their hidden agendas are, and, what motivates them, and things like that. And that became a process over time, because we realized reading those, and I have been a big fan of like long form writing. Yeah. When you write something, you display yourself, bare bones in front of your reader. And that has helped us a lot. So even today, for all such recruitments, we ask for a write-up. We don't ask for a CV, so to speak. So everyone that applies to Rebel will have to write something and say, okay, things like, what have you realized in your life from a first principle? Why do you want to come and work here? And things like that. Yeah. And that opens up a beautiful sort of sneak peek into a person's attitude and character and things like that. And we've continued to do that over time.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. I think I've heard you speak about this in the past, and it's just amazing to know that so much of this was thought out from first principles, and so much of it really worked out well. 5 out of the 8 EIRs that were hired are now designated co-founders. From what I know, 3 of them have left and started their own successful companies. Having such kind of, just identifying these people and giving them a platform has been phenomenal. And that's my next question, in fact, on culture, right? Where you have provided a platform to curate the next set of leaders, right? And you spoke about this in an interview with, I think, Aviral of AGVC, where you talk about the transition from the what, the how, and the who, right? So talk to us about what it means to be a leader and cultivate other leaders around you. How do you empower them with the right tools, support them with when required, but give them a playing field that can expand really, really well, and in turn establish them for the road ahead? Because nobody's left you. Your attrition rates with the CDOs, as you've mentioned in the past, is extremely low and extremely beyond par in terms of excellence when it comes to the industry. So help us understand this entire flywheel that you've been able to create at Bell with CEOs for different brands, whatnot.
Yeah. By the way, the 3 people who left us among the first one, I am in my limited capacity. I've been an investor in all 3 of them.
Yes.
So that is, more than anything else, that gives me a lot of pleasure that we've been able to breed founders. We have been able to breed entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
Coming to your question, I believe that if you have to set a culture in a company, the only way to set up the culture is by how you hire, how you promote and reward, and how you let go. When you do all 3 things in line with your culture, things sort of start falling in place. And that's the only way to codify this, because I am not in every kitchen and I am not in every meeting. It is not possible beyond a point in time. But our effort has always been to codify this in our hiring process, in our PMS, as we call it, performance management process, and our letting go process. So there's some behavior which is always awarded, like risk taking. If our performance has always been about results, then we would be underplaying risk taking, because people would not take risk, because not every experiment will be a results. So how you define those processes makes a lot of difference, I think. That's the only way to perpetuate culture. It is not going to happen through placards or or posters on your walls, right? There is a saying at Rebel that the values that you are valued on get perpetuated, right? So there is no other way to do this. So that's one thing that we've been able to do to some extent. I have still a lot of room for improvement for us. The second thing is, you are right. So you said you're from Calcutta and I'm a Bengali, and there is a stereotype about Bengali. The Bengalis are lazy, and I fit that stereotype perfectly. Both Kallol and I are quite lazy, which means that our go-to way of working is let someone else do things rather than us breathing down their neck and doing their work ourselves, etc., etc. So naturally it comes to us, sort of letting people make their own mistakes, and we don't have a better idea, right? Like, for example, when I ask someone to start a new business line, I have no idea how to do that business line. So I have no right to tell him or her what to do. Let that person make the mistakes and learn and then grow. And so we've created that atmosphere that you are okay to make mistakes and grow, and you'd be left alone, and no sort of, like, every morning no WhatsApp will pop up that what's happening now at this moment. And so that's the culture we've built. And thirdly, as you pointed out that, I have personally graduated from what to, how to what to who. Like initially I would be, okay, this is how we need to do it. And later on I would say, okay, this is what we need to do it, and let other people devise the house. And I have realized that I could not scale from there unless and until we move to who. And we say, okay, my job is to say, this is the right person for this business or this geography or this function. And let that person define the what and the how. And it gives that person enough space to grow, learn, create his or her own, sort of followings. And nothing gives you more pleasure than this, that when there are a lot of leaders that come out of your organization and they start taking new initiatives and they start building their teams, etc. So I know I've spoken about a lot of things together, but these are some of the things that come to my mind.
No, absolutely. I think I love that. And that's a testament to the amazing culture at Rebel. And so much so that, we had Revant on the show and we spent an entire answer talking about how Rebel was such a learning journey for his founder journey with Mosaic Wellness currently. So I can't laud that enough. And it's great to understand how you've been able to establish it. I have one final question here, Jaideep, and if it'd be interesting to understand what the smaller aspects do, right? Like so much of this I think culture is nothing but behavior that gets set into, the company environment, right? How do you ensure that the smaller aspects of culture are also taken care of? Things like, what happens in water cooler conversations, to things like what happens after an expansion is successful or not so successful, right? If you have any guardrails and ensuring that beyond the macro things of culture, if there are any smaller aspects to keep note of, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, because it's finally, everything that you do, every meeting that you attend, every task you are accomplishing and things like that, right? So there are some, and we have also evolved some of these things. Many of these things were not there a couple of years back, but now we've learned to put them in place. And we learned from, I would say many other companies like Netflix and Amazon and so on, so on and so forth. And the one thing is this concept of PRFAQ, which is which Amazon follows, that whenever someone says, okay, let's do this new thing, we don't say that, okay, give me a business plan, because we know all business plans are worthless the moment it meets reality. We say, okay, you write out from a customer point of view, that what this will mean for the customer, almost like a press release for that initiative. That if you're doing a new initiative, Times of India covers you and they'll write a paragraph. So from a customer point of view, so you write that. So every new initiative at Rebel is done like this. So anybody comes to me or anywhere in the company, say that I think we should do it, great, write a PRFAQ. That's the first thing. So people would write the PRFAQ, and the PRFAQ will be iterated and reiterated till we get to a point where you say, okay, this is great. And let's then start. So there is nothing like, make a business plan. So it's a PRFAQ. So that sort of establishes the customer first and then working backward mentality that part of the culture in everything that we do. Secondly, like something like a 6-pager, like we've abolished PowerPoint presentations now at Rebel. We say every meeting has to start with a 6-pager, where the person who is presenting or who is being reviewed or whose team is being reviewed will write long form as to what is going on, what are the good things, what are the things the person is acting on. And that makes a person think deeply and take ownership. Otherwise, if you do presentations, I have seen it in the past, and I was at McKinsey where, PowerPoint presentations used to be the lifeline. People would only write the good things and, gloss over sort of the improvement areas, and because the whole job of PowerPoint is to make the presenter look good, but then that doesn't solve a business situation. So these are some of the things that we have done. How to run the meetings and how to start a new initiative and things like that.
No, those are amazing. I think great pointers there again, and to everyone listening in, very actionable in terms of just not just like talking about it, but also figuring out mechanisms that can inculcate the sense of culture within the team. And it's great to know all that Rebel is doing. I think this is great. And now as we approach, the end portions of this conversations, Jaideep, I would love to understand on a more qualitative lens as well as on a more product lens as well, as to now that you're going after this mission of expanding across geographies, taking the mission to the world, what has it meant to go through this velocity of expansion and at the same time keep, the head straight as well, right? Not get carried away or anything of the sort. And how challenging is it? Because we've now seen with the success of Freshworks that we put India on the global product map. Rebel is championing the cause to put Indian consumers and in the consumer map of the world and dominate it, right? What are the challenges that we perhaps don't get to see? While I can get happy about the fact that Rebel Foods and Indian companies in UK, is in Philippines, is in Bangladesh, what do you know that we don't, and how do you navigate those challenges? I would love to hear that.
Yep. So the thing is, like India as a country where every state and city is different. And food is so personal, so ingrained in the culture that, a MacBook is a MacBook is a MacBook, whichever country you go to, right?
Yeah.
But you can't say that about food, right? Even within India, there is so much disparity in taste and cultural underpinnings. And if you think about countries like Philippines is completely different from Indonesia. While people say, okay, Southeast Asia, but we know, how Philippines is totally different from Indo, or Bangladesh is completely different from Thailand and things like that. Even Bangladesh is completely different from India, even West Bengal. So figuring that nuance out in each market and see, what the white space is. Different markets have different white spaces, right? And then figuring that out, being customer first in those markets, thinking about the customers in those particular markets. These are the I would say the big challenges. And obviously, like, one thing at Rebel is we always try to put a very simple sort of framework to go through any problem. Like the way the framework that we put around this geographic expansion is, on one axis if you have market size, on the other axis if you have the supply side maturity. So for example, US, it's a big size market, but the supply side is very mature. Like, all sorts of cuisines are there, big brands are there. That market will need to be tackled totally differently from Saudi Arabia, which is big market, but supply side is not mature. So, and then, the white spaces would be different. The brands that we play would be different. So this is how we think about it, and try and put countries in this archetype and see, okay, how do we address those? And then secondly, it's always about the who, as I said, who is leading Southeast Asia, and is that person capable enough to understand these nuances and navigate the complexities or not? Once I'm confident that, okay, we've got the right person, then actually I don't worry about it anymore. And, we obviously speak, once a month or something like that, but it's that person's prerogative as to how he or she would run the market and what he or she would do. Because as long as that person is, aligned to the overall mission, everything kind of falls in place. I don't have to worry about what that person is doing on a day-to-day basis.
Got it. No, that's very simplified to understand from, and I love the constant focus on people, of course. Next up, Jaideep, you've spoken about this in the past in terms of the long-term mindset when the unicorn announcement recently took place as well, and congratulations aren't due, of course. You also wrote, right, it is still day one, we're playing the long game. While that looks good when we read about it, why don't you give us a review of how do you think about a long-term infinite game, as they call it, and what are the guardrails of thinking with a mindset that is truly long-term and not sacrificing things like short-term growth, or not maybe burning too much cash or not being capital efficient and things like that. If you can give us any anecdotes that fall into that spectrum of truly thinking and acting long-term, that would be wonderful, because I think that's one thing that starkly stands out about your persona as a founder.
Yeah, see, we are at the sort of the early stages of a new industry emerging, right? This is equivalent to what sort of Henry Ford was doing in 1910s and what Jeff Bezos was doing in 1995 and what Tesla or this guy was doing, about 10 years back. I'm not saying we are at the same league, so to speak, but the industry, I'm saying, the internet restaurant disrupting a very old traditional industry. So if you look at all of these past cases, the first version of a new category is always less efficient than an established version. The horse used to be faster than the first car.
Yeah.
Walmart is even today more profitable than Amazon. So if we over-index on efficiency, then we don't discover a new vista or new category. And the moment this is the problem with big companies. That's why startups emerge, because the big companies have to be efficient because they are public companies. They have to do quarterly earnings. So people told me, why could Jubilant do it? I mean, maybe they can, but they also have to meet the quarterly earnings, right? And, it's not easy. Yeah. But we as startups, our job is to create a new category, right? And so obviously we have to make sure we don't run out of money, because then we will die and, we won't be able to build on that vision. But as long as we don't run out of money, we are prudent enough and not splurge and not, do random things like build a big world headquarters or something like that. As long as all our investment goes behind making the customer's life better and bring, unique experiences, great experience to the customer, then we should not over-index on today's efficiency. We should over-index on what does it look like 20 years down the line or 10 years down the line for the customer. How would the new world look like? This is what, every major inventor in the world, in the startup world, has done. Yeah. Right, looking into the future and seeing, okay, what the future looks like, rather than trying to solve today's efficiency, right? And that has been if you think about our canvas. So again, another 2x2 that we use all the time is, on one axis, if you have single serve to group serve, other axis of value to luxury, then all customer food missions can be plotted on this canvas. Like single serve value is your weekday lunch, group serve value is your office snacks, group serve luxury is your weekend dinner, and things like that. And this is an infinite canvas, because food will change, food trend will change, seasonal, Navratri, Ramadan, Christmas, and then intermittent fasting, or I don't know, vegan. This is like an ever evolving thing, right?
True.
And this canvas is in front of us. So for next 50, 100 years, much beyond when we are running this company, we should be always in the game, right? Always drawing on this canvas.
Yeah.
As long as we build a platform and an operating system that caters to this vision, we are happy. And we not run out of money. That's important, because otherwise, it's not going to happen. But that's how we think about this, long term. Obviously, we are conscious about unit economics, profitability, but we don't over-index on that, because then we know that, we would be optimizing for short term rather than thinking long term. And that's not our place in the sun, right? That's a lot of other people are doing it. We want to do something that's pioneering, that'll live, centuries beyond, what we are doing ourselves. And it might sound very grand, but that sort of motivates us. And that's how we think about it.
Certainly, no, I think that's absolutely grand. And I really hope that answer ages well with time, and we'll all be cheering for it. But that was great, Jaideep. And I have one final question on this entire founder persona thing. But you've been very vocal, and you had this passion of mountaineering. And I would request everyone watching, if you're interested further, look up Shashank and Jaideep's conversation on that very subject. But I want to dive deeper into two aspects of mountaineering vis-a-vis starting up. One of them is not going too fast, and that was peculiar and mostly against conventional wisdom, right? Where it's mostly around break things, fail fast, whatnot. Why do you say, we shouldn't go too fast as well when starting up? And what would your recommendation to future founders be in that very aspect?
There is a saying in mountaineering that you climb high and sleep low. That's because that's how you acclimatize. Because when you're going too fast and you climb to a height where the air is thin, you gasp for your breath, and it happens in business all the times. Sometimes we go too fast, but we have to pause and we have to retrace our path a little bit and acclimatize to that heightened environment. This is, in business language, people say that as you scale, different problems emerge.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, right? It's a little bit of hindsight in this association between mountaineering and business, but it's actually pretty similar. And I have seen both in mountaineering and in business. When we grow too fast, we are in rarefied atmosphere, and we struggle. It's time to take a pause, and it's time to sort of make sure enough oxygen is in your blood. Otherwise, you'll burn. And in mountaineering, the consequences are even more disastrous than in business. But the philosophy is pretty similar. So I would say that's what I mean when I say, don't go too fast. Actually, it's not don't go too fast. If you end up going too fast, take a pause. Is what I mean. That you got to acclimatize and then take the next step.
Got it. So I stand corrected, and that's in fact very interesting, food for thought, certainly. But the second part, as to how you draw parallels between mountaineering and scaling up, or maybe scaling as a founder, is figuring out, right? And I think that's mostly what every founder does as he or she builds a company, which is figuring out at each step of the way. I'm guessing you're also the founder of a unicorn for the first time in your life, right? So you are figuring out as you go. But if young founders are listening in, how would you suggest we make peace with, or be prepared to be not prepared, right? Like, how do we make that peace of mind and understand that this is the challenge we are signing up for as future founders? I think that'd be great to hear.
See, everybody will have a different answer for this, right?
Yeah.
The end game is like figuring it out, but the way different people do it would be different.
Sure.
The way, at least, I think I have this, I have many shortcomings. As I said, I'm lazy, and I'm, sort of hot-headed, and, a lot of people at Rebel will tell you that. But I would say the one thing that I've preserved over the time is that my willingness to learn. And, at no point in time, I have said that I know the answer. I know everything. And and I'm a bibliophile. I'm always reading 3 books at a time. And that's my biggest source of learning. And I think either through books or some other mechanism, I'm not saying, okay, books, it has to be books, but it has helped me a lot. And having that mindset that I don't have the answer, and I have to learn, like every conversation, like even the conversation that I'm having with you, my ears and eyes are open, and I have this ability to learn, and that's my only superpower in life. I'm not, I'm introvert. I don't think I'm a great public speaker or anything like that. But one thing I can do is I can soak information, and I can learn. And that, I believe, has helped me, at least personally, to figure things out and not being bogged down by, okay, I know this, and, I know how this works. And I will tell someone else that this is how it works. And, I'm never under those assumptions. So one thing is that when someone confronts me with something, I'm very, very flexible. I'm always sort of learning, and don't have a rigid mindset. I mean, as they say, startup is nothing but a process of holding your conviction loosely. So so I guess that mentality has at least helped me, that having that idea that I don't know everything, and I have to learn. So I guess that's at least for my case, that is what has happened, or it's still happening.
Wonderful. I think having that learnability, student mindset, right? If you can be a lifelong student, I think Shane Parrish said this, that can be wonderful. For the final question, Jaideep, I want to end on a personal note, but I think one thing that has also stood out about you is that you've been a deep thinker about things, right? I mean, you've thought out things and then executed them. And at the same time, you've also taken certain bold bets in life, right? This could be the INSEAD second MBA, or leaving the associate partner role and starting up Fasos, which has now become this giant. Talk to us about how, as a founder, have you evolved through the 10-year-long journey, and how do you continue to, as you were mentioning, being a learner happens to be one, but all of the different principles you have, be it writing, be it thinking, be it the bold bets that you've taken in life, how have they evolved into shaping who you've become as the journey has progressed with Fasos? I think that would be a wonderful to know to end this great conversation.
See, one thing we already spoke about, that I've graduated from how to what to who. That's been a big transformation in my journey. The other thing I would say is I have become more patient. So in the beginning, I would be looking for results quicker, and I would seek immediate sort of validation of an idea. But I realized over time that patience is a great virtue, and it, because I have seen ideas that we started back in 2013, but finally they got successful after many iterations, closing down, restarting in 2019. So it took like 6-7 years for an idea to find its time. And that has been a big realization for me, and hence it does not bother me as much if an experiment sort of fails or fizzles out at a particular point in time. And because I know that maybe the idea is ahead of time, maybe we need to be patient, etc. So that is, I would say, the second transformation that has happened in me. And probably related to that, I think I have become more empathetic as a human being. Like earlier, I would be more cutthroat and more, I would say, action oriented, and got to happen like this very moment, similar to the last point I said. And that would manifest in my meetings, where I would get angry and shout and things like that. And I'm hoping that I've gotten better, but maybe other people at Rebel should they would be able to tell this better, whether I've gotten better or not. But at least I can sense that that hot-headedness is gone, and I get I get more thoughtful. I put myself in someone else's shoes more easily, and things like that. So I would say those are some of the things that have happened. And secondly, again related, that my sense of so I've become a more secure person. That the sense of insecurity has receded over time. As I saw, different bets taking place, in bold bets, as you talk about. Initially, I would be very insecure about those bets, and I would try to say, okay, this is, try to think too much about a particular decision, etc. But over time, I've also understood that some of the bets are two-way doors. Like, even if I make that bet today, tomorrow I can retrace and everything would be fine. And so I don't I don't fret too much about those bets anymore. But then there are still some bets which are one-way doors. Like like investing, $10 million in a company. That's a one-way door. Money is gone out of the bank. So I take those bets, slowly and more deliberately. But there are bets that I take more easily these days because I know those are two-way streets, and I can trace back. So those are some of the things that I've probably learned over time.
That's magnificent. I think that's a great close to what has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Jaideep. I think I certainly have taken back a lot throughout this conversation, and the wait to finally speak to you has been totally worth it. I'm certain everyone listening in will also enjoy this conversation, and I hope you had a great time.
Absolutely. This was a refreshing interview. I must say that you talked about things that I don't get to talk about, but I love to talk about. So thank you very much for having me, and all the best.
Thank you so much.